Couple of the usual suspects. Well, we are at 12:01, and in the interest of time, I'm going to launch into it. I will run through the presentation that I've got ready to go, and then we'll take some questions. Before I begin, I would just like to introduce the other members of the BCM team that are with me here this afternoon. Anne, why don't you start?
Hi, my name's Ann Marisick. I'm the community organizer, and I've gotten to witness firsthand all of the craziness that was the 131st legislative session this year, and kind of see all the work that Jim puts into tracking these bills and the testimonies that we do. So this is going to be a good session, and I hope everybody enjoys it.
And then we have two other Bicycle Coalition icons here. I don't know if that's Jean or who that is. If they don't, while we're waiting for them to do something, why don't we introduce our all-star Bowdoin intern for the summer, JK.
Hi, I'm JK. I'm the summer intern, and I've been working with Anne and Jim to track the legislature and some community outreach work.
Cool. Well, I don't know if these are phantom presences using our icon or what's going on with that, but I'm going to just start. So give me a second. Let me share the screen here with y'all. So BCM went to Augusta. You should be able to ever nod your heads affirmatively if you see my PowerPoint deck. Okay, excellent, excellent. And so this is just going to be a quick, or not too quick, but it will be a retrospective of the work on the priority bills that we were focused on that impacted vulnerable users. Today's webinar is going to cover, the kinds of bills that we paid attention to, a brief reminder as to why work in the legislature matters, even when you win or, win, lose, or draw. It's actually very, very important that we have a presence up there. But we will talk a little bit about the bills that we were really focused on, our priority bills, and the ones that we did win, lose, and draw on. But in all cases, we started and maintained great conversations and developed some excellent relationships. I'll talk a little bit about ongoing unfinished work, and then, we can take some questions, and we'll try to have you on your way by 1 p.m. or just a little before. So it was another hefty session in the legislature. There were over 2,000 bills. 2019 was the final number. And we read them and we look at all of them to see if there's any connection to or impact on vulnerable user safety, access, convenience. Anything that also deals with transportation funding, broad policy, we pay attention to, and sometimes that takes us into sort of interesting corners and back roads, if you will. We commented on a bill about expanding the width of snowplows because we were concerned about the impact that might have on people walking on the edge of the road in the winter. We weighed in on bills that had to do with vehicle inspection. We weighed in on bills about loss of license due to DUIs. So it's not just bike ped strictly. It's also, we're looking for bills that impact the behavior of drivers or the rules that govern the operation of drivers on the road, and we weigh in on those as well. So we looked at all of those, and other bills that we pay attention to are ones that touch or intersect with our mission. For example, things that touch on environmental policy, health, transportation equity, or bills initiated by partners. Our friends at GrowSmart launched a few bills, and the Maine Trail Coalition was also involved with some bills that we shared an interest in. Overall, we closely tracked 50 bills. We provided testimony on 38 separate pieces of legislation. And, as I mentioned earlier, work in the legislature always matters. The most important component of it is really relationship building. You know, we get to meet legislators, talk with legislators, work on policy, and really get to articulate why it's important that people pay attention to vulnerable user safety on roads. Everyone is a pedestrian at some point in their day. Just a reminder that pedestrians do include people in wheelchairs and who roll rather than walk. But we really feel it's important to have a presence up there and remind legislators and policymakers that transportation is not just about cars. It's not just about trucks. It's not even just about trains or airplanes. It's really first and foremost about letting people move freely on public ways. And you know, that's an important part of our work, just talking to legislators about that. And so, you know, we're going to talk about wins, losses, and draws. I mean, wins are great. And we love it when we get wins and we get to report that we absolutely, you know, succeeded in a legislative effort. But, you know, even sometimes when we win, we feel like, well, we're not done. And that's certainly the case with a number of the bills that were passed this session. I'll talk about that in a minute. And even losses, I try to put a positive spin on losses. Losses still are successes insofar as a conversation was started and a gesture was made. And there were several bills that lost that we really felt were important. And, you know, particularly we'll talk about speed limit setting, but there were 3 separate bills about giving municipalities the power to set speed limits. And that is itself a measure of kind of public interest in that particular topic. All of those bills, with the exception of one that was started by Brad Farron in the Transportation Committee, wound up failing. But as I said, we did a nice job of raising some concerns, and not all of those bills are fully dead or lost. So stay tuned. And then there are a few draws, and you know, we label things draws that we don't quite know what's happened. Sometimes progress is stopped, bills get tabled, they get carried over, they don't even get reported out on, so they're in this kind of limbo state. So sometimes I just call it a draw if I don't understand what the ultimate dispensation of the bill was. And so some of those we hope to revisit in the second session. I'll talk about that a little bit more too. But, you know, our role up there is to, as I said, just really raise the profile of bike ped safety and access issues, to promote and support legislation that would make Maine better for biking and walking, and to stop and impede legislation that would do the opposite. You know, we see our roles up there as watchdogs, as advocates, and certainly as influencers. And the Transportation Committee, they saw me a lot this session, and I always got a warm and friendly greeting from the chairs because they had gotten to see me so many times. I was a familiar face up there, which was kind of nice. So running through the win, lose, and draw columns here. The first bill, LD 209, this was a bill that would require the state to build a trail on the Berlin subdivision rail corridor. And this is one of the corridors that did have what's called a Rail Use Advisory Council convened around. They did submit a vote that supported trail, but it was a pretty divided vote. It wasn't a clear, you know, it wasn't a strong majority report. It was a majority report. This bill was never really fleshed out with much more than conceptual language. And when it went to the Transportation Committee, it died. But again, even though it was a loss, you know, we did have the opportunity to make the statement that, you know, the legislature and the DOT should follow the recommendations of the RUACs, the Rail Use Advisory Councils. And when they say build a trail, you know, try not to second guess that. You should actually build the trail on it. And that came up as an issue on a couple of other bills as well. And some we were successful. Well, actually, the critical ones we were successful on, but this one, as a concept bill, died. And we're going to keep an eye on it and continue to press for a trail on that corridor. Our first win was on a pretty you know, I wouldn't call it an insignificant bill. It's an important bill. All the bills that we work on are important, but it was an easy win for us. This bill would have or did extend the exemption for stormwater permitting to hiking trails. Some of you may recall that in 2021, we worked to exempt mountain bike trails from stormwater permitting regulations, which was something that DEP was completely supportive of, and they testified in support of the bill. And depending on how you read the law, you could say, well, that applies to hiking trails as well. But we heard from a nonprofit that is really focused on building trails in Western Maine, and they wanted to see specific language in law that said, you know, a hiking trail, which is very small, should be exempted as a mountain bike trail is from stormwater permitting. The other exempted uses, just for your edification, are logging roads, motorized trails up to 24 feet wide, and farm activities. So it wasn't really that controversial to try to get trails that are no more than 4 feet wide exempted from stormwater permitting. DEP did come in behind that one, and we're excited to have that as our first win of the session. That one was sponsored by Art Bell. LD 256 is perhaps the bill that we are the most excited about. This was a bill that sponsored by Senator Maddie Daughtry from Brunswick, that would change the law governing Efficiency Maine to permit them to create an e-bike rebate program. Prior to the existence of this bill, Efficiency Maine took the stance that, well, it's not really authorized in statute for us to permit rebates to be extended to e-bikes. We changed that law successfully, and the governor signed it. And now we are at the point where, okay, Efficiency Maine has the authorization to create a rebate program. And the next step is to actually get that rebate program up and running. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but there's good progress to report on that, and things are moving forward well. LD 404 was another bill that dealt with a railway corridor, and this is the Mountain Division Line, which some of you know runs basically from Westbrook all the way to Freiburg and beyond, actually to North Conway. And this bill, again, would require the DOT to follow the recommendation of the Rail Use Advisory Council. This bill had the support of the DOT from the get-go, was sponsored by Rick Bannett, a Republican out of Oxford County. So a lot of nice bipartisan element there. And despite some last minute maneuverings where it seemed like the rail with trail folks were going to assert a different kind of stance on it, this bill finally was passed in its original form, authorizing the creation of a trail on the Mountain Division Line, funded through the Maine DOT budget. And you know, I've spoken with the commissioner about it, and I've spoken with some other folks, and you know, I think the planning and implementation of this bill could start, you know, soon. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what we can do to make sure that actually happens in a bit. But running down on the draw side here, LD 527, this is a bill that was sponsored by Representative Ankeles out of Brunswick. And it was a bill that we worked on helping him draft. And what it wanted to do was give municipalities the authority to create low speed zones that were kind of optimized for walking and bicycling. And the idea was that, you know, it had some really practical limitations on it that we thought would be palatable to the DOT. We emphasized that the road had to be no more than 35 miles per hour to begin with. And so you're only going to drop it 10 miles an hour to a 25 zone to avoid creating speed differentials. Traffic calming elements could be installed in such places as well. And we really felt that this was, you know, a bill that had some strength to it, because it would give municipalities a little bit more, quite a lot more authority to actually set speed limits in their own communities. Right now, every speed limit in the state is ultimately controlled by the Maine DOT. And sometimes the process that they use, we feel doesn't completely take into account context. They're moving in, DOT sees these bills and becomes sensitive to the public outcry about speeding. So a lot of benefit from this conversation. There was another bill that the Grow Smart folks brought forward that also dealt with setting speed limits, again, giving municipalities even broader authority to do so. And the first bill, LD 31, was a bill that Brad Farron from the Transportation Committee presented that would reduce or give people or municipalities the authority to lower speeds in construction zones relatively quickly. That's the only bill that moved forward, but 3 separate bills were in the legislature this session that dealt with trying to slow speeding traffic and trying to change the regs by which speed limits are set. I think that the DOT heard that loud and clear, and this bill, LD 527, is kind of tabled. It's in a state of limbo. It is neither dead nor fully alive. I suppose it's in sort of an induced coma as we wait and see what happens. The DOT has spoken with Representative Ankeles, and we had a number of conversations about what to do here. And the last thing we heard is that the DOT wants to actually try to implement some traffic calming in the areas of concern that Representative Ankeles had in his community, and see if that proves satisfactory in terms of calming traffic. And then we'll see if it's really necessary to change the regs by which speed limits are set. So this bill is, like I said, it's in limbo, but there are things going on around it. And when I get to the ongoing work, I'll talk a little bit more about that. So one of our biggest disappointments this session was the death of LD 730, which was our 3rd attempt to try and mandate basic traffic safety education in the school system. You may know that the Bicycle Coalition of Maine administers a education program on behalf of the Maine DOT. We're statewide. We serve, somewhere around 10,000 people annually, but that's only a fraction of the school age population. And so what we've been trying to do is get a system in place that would make sure that every single kid got at least 1 hour of basic traffic safety education in their school year, 1 hour per year. It had considerable support, but it is technically a mandate, and that's a difficult thing to get through the Maine legislature. And I don't think any mandates made it through this year. But so this bill did die in committee, but there was a lot of interest in other school day issues and about the school day schedule. And so there is hope that in the second session, which starts in January, there might be a way to resurrect some form of this bill. So stay tuned for that. I'll talk a little bit about ongoing work on that when we get there too. 1076 was an interesting bill. This would have permitted the use of what's called automatic speed enforcement on Maine roadways. Right now, it is illegal to use a camera to enforce traffic violations, and this bill would have legalized the use of traffic cameras to enforce speeding violations in school and work zones. So we thought, limited scope, for the children, for the people working in the street. Traffic cameras have really an incredible record of reducing speeds and improving safety, but they also raise serious concerns about privacy and about civil liberties and about equity, and how they are deployed is really the most important component to these conversations. If you put them in low-income neighborhoods or neighborhoods populated primarily by minorities, do you wind up targeting groups unfairly? The ACLU opposed this bill. We had reservations and concerns about it ourselves too, but in the interest of safety, we did push it along. The state police were non-committal on it. And the bill ultimately did die in committee. we don't expect to try to work too hard to bring that back this session, but it is an issue we're monitoring because we're trying to figure out ways to extend the reach of systems that help promote safety on the roads. And so it's whether it's law enforcement or the extension of law enforcement via traffic cameras. We're looking at all kinds of options. I mean, we really like raised speed tables and geometric things done to the road that make people slow down, whether they want to or not. There's nothing like a little speed hump at a crosswalk to make you slow down. So we're also working on those kind of things all the time. LD 1141 was a bill that we worked on in partnership with a Republican from Washington County, Marion Moore, a senator. And she reached out to us because she heard from a constituent who was really concerned about how poor the access was to state parks and other regionally significant locations. And so I helped her draft a bill up that would have required that the DOT place some priority on shoulder development on roads that access state parks and other destinations of state or regional significance. That bill wound up also being defeated, but the good news out of that bill is, again, that was one that sort of caught the attention of the DOT again, and the DOT, oops, sorry about that. The DOT is planning to do an exercise that will look at what are called highway corridor priority 3 and 4. So they're kind of like lowish volume roads, not like really super important roads, and figure out which ones need to be optimized for bicycle and pedestrian traffic. And we work very closely with Dakota Hewlett and the planning department at Maine DOT, and hopefully that process is going to start soon. It's one of the things that spun out of the active transportation plan, which we were also very, very involved with. The Maine Trails Bond, LD 1156, which is a asterisk because it's a bill that was initiated by some of our friends and partners. And this bill is currently kind of stuck in appropriations. It got carried over. There is some division within the coalition driving this bill, which would essentially provide funding for recreational trails. It's a bond program. It would fund non-motorized and motorized, and there was some back and forth over whether the allocations were appropriate. The bill is currently, as I said, sort of stalled and in a state of limbo, not quite as in a state of limbo as 527, perhaps, maybe a little bit more clarity on this one. But this one I don't expect to see resolution of until we get to the next session in 2024. 1245, just a real brief one. This was probably our biggest defensive effort for the session. This was a bill that it was a very interesting and poorly written bill that would have required registration of motorized bicycles, tricycles, and scooters. And there was some talk about maybe we should just extend that to bikes. I think the intent was to actually require the registration of electric assist bicycles. But the drafters of the bill didn't realize that e-bikes are very much carved out and talked about in a different way than motorized vehicles, motor vehicles, or motorized bicycles. So the bill was kind of odd in that it didn't really apply to the devices that they thought it was going to. We opposed it loudly and frequently. And that bill did die in committee, and so we consider that a win for defensive advocacy. 1450 is another bill that would put some funding towards the creation of the Mountain Division Line Trail. That gets a double question mark because the last time I checked, which was yesterday, it was on the appropriations table, and are probably carried over. I'm sure it's carried over, and so they'll be talking about that bill and resolving it finally, I assume, in January. But that one was another one that was sort of in a gray state, and wasn't even clear that it was a draw to me. It was so obscure. So next slide is, I think this is the halfway slide. Yes, this slide has absolutely nothing to do with the presentation except to acknowledge the joy that bicycling can bring to people. This kid, I use this kid's picture on a bunch of slides just because she's so cute and having such a good time on her bike. So there you go. Consider that like a little mental dish of sherbet halfway through the meal here. Now back to legislation. LD 1551 was a bill sponsored by Senator Mike Tipping. It was originally an Idaho stop bill, and this bill would have permitted bicyclists to treat a red light as a stop sign, meaning you could stop and go when it was safe, and stop signs as yield signs, meaning you had to slow and look around before proceeding, but you could do that. We suggested that the Idaho stop might be a bridge too far for Maine at this time, and so we proposed an amendment that would make it just what's called a Delaware stop, which would permit stop signs to be treated as yield signs. This has been the law in Delaware for several years. The safety data is very compelling. I mean, I have to say that when this bill first was proposed to me, I was a bit of a skeptic and really was unsure it was a good idea and was worried about backlash. But there is really good safety data, and even NHTSA, the National National Transportation Safety and Highway Authority, came out in support of this kind of legislation. That said, the bill wound up dying due to a procedural gaffe, where the committee report eventually came out as a minority ought to pass. It went to the Senate and it did pass, but the minority report got forwarded to the House erroneously, without registering that there was more support for it than there actually was, and it wound up dying due to a procedural error. So we're hoping that one could be revisited in the second session. 1780 was a bill that we worked on with Melanie Sachs, and this would have simply taken all of the micromobility devices, which include, things as diverse. I mean, bicycles technically are a micromobility device, but usually when people think about them, they think about like electric skateboards, one wheels, electric scooters. These are the kind of devices that people really think of as micromobility, micromobility devices. This bill would have basically required all of those devices behave more or less like bicycles when they're on the road, so that they need to go with traffic, they need to obey traffic control devices, they need to be predictable, they need to have proper equipment. And this bill ultimately died on the recommendation of the state police, which supported the concept, but just could not get behind the idea that people would be using electric skateboards to commute to school or work. And I think that this is going to be something that's going to wind up being revisited, because if you've been in downtown Portland at all recently, or in any other major city, you see people commuting and using e-skateboards as a way to get around cities. And we feel that it would be better to have these people regulated in the sense of, why don't you behave like other mobility devices on the road, and follow the rules that apply to all of them, including especially bicycles. Because if you've ever been, for example, on the Casco Bay Bridge, going from South Portland to Portland on the bike lane, and had an e-skateboard coming at you the wrong way at 20 miles per hour, you may not realize that there is a real need for this legislation. But I have had that experience, and so my passion for this was partly driven by personal experience. But nonetheless, it died, and We don't know if that's going to come back anytime soon, but I think eventually the state of Maine will have to do something to think about regulating those devices. Railroad corridor bills, they get a whole category to themselves. All of these bills, there's a little overlap here, but they all had something to do with railroad corridors. Some of them were about, let's restore the rail, let's put some money into rail, let's do feasibility studies, let's designate the major corridors. There was even a bill that said, let's take the rail corridors away from the DOT and give them to something else. It was never clearly articulated what that entity would be. We opposed all of them except for the ones that supported building trails. And we did this, you may have heard me say this on previous webinars, but you might think that rail with trail is the compromise that helps everyone and suits everyone's needs on these rail corridors. But the problem with rail with trail, it is so phenomenally expensive that if you support rail with trail, you support nothing happening for the foreseeable future. To give you an example, the Mountain Division Line estimates for the least expensive version of rail with trail, which would have been rail that was suitable for slow speed freight and a crushed rock path, came in at $145 million. The trail by itself was $17 million. So they're both pretty big numbers, but $17 million is much more imaginable within the next decade than $145 million, which is close to half of the annual DOT budget. So we opposed any kind of conversation about feasibility studies, about rail with trail, about designating major corridors. Our position is that if rail was going to be coming back to Maine soon, it would be obvious, and it would probably already be here if rail was feasible to run on these corridors. The other hang up with rail in Maine is that the density of the populations along the corridors is below the threshold in most cases that permits federal funding to be leveraged. So it's like, it is a real stretch to get the money that would be necessary to upgrade the rail lines and bring the rail back. So until it becomes really economically feasible to bring them back, we adopt the position that was really, I think, the first time I heard this phrase was from Commissioner Van Note, where he said, I support trail until rail. And that is the official position of the BCM too, because we like trains. I love riding trains. And I think that everyone would agree that if you could ride a train instead of taking a car to more places, that would take cars off the road and it would make conditions better for people walking and bicycling. But the reality is rail's not coming back anytime soon. And, I would love to be able to change my tune on that. And I always keep an open mind, but for this legislative session, we took a firm and unrelenting stand against anything that was going to talk about doing anything but put a trail on these fallow railroad corridors. So ongoing and unfinished work. So LD 256 is the e-bike rebate. I mentioned that there are some good things happening around that already. And indeed, I'm meeting with Efficiency Maine staff tomorrow to talk about some preliminary kind of recommendations and a sketch of the program. The current thinking is that this program will have income eligibility restrictions. So we want to really kind of target lower and middle income folks to get first crack at this. There's a few other recommendations that I want to make to them to kind of ensure that it helps local businesses and that we get safe equipment out on the road. But we thought we were going to have to arms, and I was actually drafting a note to their executive director and CCing Senator Daughtry, who is the sponsor of the bill, saying, hey, let's get together and talk about this. And they reached out to us and said, hey, let's get together and talk about this. And so I was super excited about that. And we've got JK, our intern, doing some research right now about e-bike rebate programs that exist elsewhere in the country. Colorado and Vermont notably have very successful ones. There are also a few municipal ones right here in Maine. Both South Portland and Portland have rebate programs, and I know that the South Portland program is, crushing. I think it was like 58 e-bikes in general, and I think it was 24 cargo e-bikes have come through that program. So there is demand for this. And if you don't know what a cargo e-bike is exactly what it sounds like. It is a utility vehicle that lets you carry groceries, children, whatever it is you need to carry. I knew a guy who did a tree service out of a cargo bike, and Senator Daughtry, who also owns a brewery, at one point we were given a couple of e-bikes to use as demos and loaners, and we loaned one to Senator Daughtry, and she used it at her business to deliver kegs of beer to local establishments. So cargo bikes are game changers, and we're very excited that there's progress on this. Hopefully there will be more e-bikes out there, giving people an option for mobility that doesn't just mean you're driving a car or a pickup. We're hoping to get GoPIF involved. If you know folks involved with GoPIF, every chance you get, speak positively about the advent of an e-bike rebate program. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more we build enthusiasm for it, the more the buzz is going to get back to Efficiency Maine and the people who are going to be implementing this program, and the more likely it is to happen soon and at a robust level. LD 404, so there's a signing ceremony for that bill yesterday. That's the Mountain Division Line authorization. There's nothing that really needs to be done at this point, but this is one of those bills that, okay, so the door is open, things can happen, and the BCM's next role is going to be to see that things actually do happen. So it's great that the state, the legislature has authorized the spending of money to create the Mountain Division Line. The BCM plans to ask a lot of questions about, hey, when's that going to happen? And we may be asking you to chime in on that. But for now, we're just asking you to stay tuned, and we'll be monitoring it and let you know when there's an opportunity to jump in and do something to help move this along. I think I mentioned earlier, 1141, we are in the process of beginning to work with Maine on high priority AT corridors. There's a good likelihood that we'll be reaching out to membership and folks like yourselves to get a sense of, where do you ride a bike in your area? What do you think is important? There is a layer of complexity here, in that the high priority active transportation corridors are going to be limited to certain roadway priorities. So what we'll probably be doing is working out some kind of map or some kind of regional list that we'll have people hopefully weighing in on, saying, yep, this is an important one to really improve. A lot of people ride bikes here, but you can imagine, like, for example, the route that goes down to Popham Beach. It's like, I probably hear about that every couple of years, like how much that route needs shoulders all the way down to the turn onto the beach. So places like that are the kind of places that we want to identify and make sure that DOT is thinking about accommodating, the access of those sites without just relying on cars. So I mentioned too that the second session of the 131st is coming. So the Maine legislature, it meets for 2 years. The first session, which we just concluded, is what they call the first regular session. The second session is usually just dedicated to emergency legislation and unfinished business. And in years past, it was sort of a light session, but in the last few years, the second session has been quite active and quite busy, and it looks like it's going to be again this year because, again, there were 2019 bills that had to be heard, that had to have public, they had to have public testimony on. that had to have a committee meeting on, and then it had to go through the process in the chambers and all the back and forth around each and every bill. And as you probably know, the legislature didn't finish the first session until last week. I mean, they were well overdue. So there is the opportunity to propose new legislation, and that window closes on September 29th. That's what cloture means. It's just that's when you have to have new legislation proposed and submitted by. And we are hoping to talk to some folks about maybe getting some either bills resurrected or some different legislation proposed. And certainly there's a couple of bills, as we discussed, that are in that sort of state of limbo that we plan to be active on. But what happens is after cloture, after the window for any new legislation closes, a group called the Legislative Council, which is made up of legislators and leadership in the legislature, get together and they decide, okay, this bill passes muster, we're going to hear it and we're going to make it go. So the first time we passed the stormwater exemption, we actually proposed it as an emergency bill because the stormwater permitting was was about to interfere with the completion of a trail that was really important to the economic life of Carabasset Valley, because it was an important connector for the mountain bike community and they wanted to get it done. They had the money in place, and that bill did wind up passing muster as an emergency bill. But so, the emergency legislation needs to have some kind of compelling reason as to why it needs to be heard in the second session. That session will start in January 2024. I'm already in some informal conversations with some of our friends in the legislature that are very sympathetic to bike ped issues, including a number of people on the transportation committee. And we're hoping to set up some kind of, get together to talk about what we might do in the second session and to give them a hearty thanks. And, on that note, if you could take the time to thank your legislators for the work that they did, and particularly, work in some kind of reference to your support or your attention to bike ped issues. That'd be helpful. We want to make sure that the legislators are getting thanked for a job that is often pretty thankless. So as I mentioned, LD 527 is one of the other bills. This is a bill that we hope that we can bring back in the second session, simply because it kind of got derailed due to a procedural problem. So I'm somewhat confident that we might be able to bring. Oh, I'm sorry, no, that's 527 is the one with Dan Ankley's and the traffic calming. I should have put 1551 on here. That's the Delaware stop. I do hope that we can bring that one back. LD 527 is being carried over, so that will be heard no matter what, and we hope to have more information to bring to bear on that. The traffic safety education bill, as I mentioned, is dead at the moment, but there were a number of questions that came out of the committee about the school day, and I think that Jean in particular had some conversations with people that suggest that it might actually be resurrected in the second session, and we will certainly be advocating for that, because we see this is as a really important thing to include in a Maine school kids' education. And I think that's it. Yeah, that is it. And if you want to shoot me an email, I'm at jim@bikemaine.org. And I know that there's a number of, I see there's messages in chat. I don't know if there are any questions, but I'm going to stop sharing. And if you have a question, please use your raise hand feature in Zoom, and we'd be happy to try and answer it. Oh, here's a ONTP. I'm just looking at the chat right now.
I think we covered most of the questions in the chat. I think maybe Sue Ellen and I need to share our acronyms list with everyone before the next legislative talk, so we can get everybody on the same page with all the transportation acronyms. I see Marianne Moisen has a question. If you want to unmute.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thanks for all this, Jim, and all your hard work. I have a question from my bike ped committee here in Damascotta. We're kind of getting up to speed on e-bikes. And also I'm sitting on our town's comprehensive plan committee. So I'm just wondering, is the state or are there towns or municipalities that are regulating e-bikes in terms of speed and where they can ride and the types of e-bikes?
There are, yeah, no, and it's a great question. Thanks for asking it. And as the rebate, program comes up to speed, I imagine this question is going to come up more and more often. So under, you ready for this? Title 29A, Chapter 19, Section 2056. Not that I've committed that to memory or anything, but that is the section of Maine law that deals with bicycle operation, almost in its entirety. And that's where e-bikes are regulated. E-bikes in Maine are regulated following what's called the 3-class system that has been adopted in a lot of places, like 38 different states. And there are 3 types of e-bikes. Class 1, which is pedal assist only. So you have to turn the cranks to get speed, and the assist cuts out at 20 miles per hour. Class 2, 20 miles per hour, speed limit, again, built into the bike, but it also has a throttle. So a class 2, you either turn the cranks to get boost or you just twist a throttle. And then a class 3 is an electric assist bicycle that'll go up to 28 miles per hour, but only has pedal assist. So you have to be pedaling to get that degree of boost. Class 1s and class 2s are typically permitted anywhere a conventional bike is. Class 3s are restricted to basically roadways. They're not even supposed to be on multi-use paths, but we're pretty sure that they are. The regulatory recommendation that we typically make about e-bikes is post a 15 mile per hour speed limit and enforce that. It's almost impossible to try and regulate them by class effectively, because you'd have to pull people over and then you have to look for the sticker on the bike and say, oh, you're in a class 2 and we don't let class 2s be here. It just seems to make a lot more sense to regulate them by speed, and really that captures those scorchers on their gravel grinders who can do 23 miles per hour without any boost at all. So by coming up with a speed limit that kind of makes everyone show mutual respect in places where there's other users, I think we come up with a system that works better. I'd be happy to talk with you more about that. I do quite a lot of work on micromobility policy. Jim at bikemaine.org if you want more. Thank you for the question. Great question.
Just a quick note from the chat. Winston noted that both LD 527 and the Delaware Stop are high priority. So let them know if there's anything that needs doing. Just to let people know, we are going to be, after this, we're going to be adding this to our website and putting an updated website of all the legislation that we covered. And we will certainly be sending out calls to action as we have different things that need doing, people who need talking to you. So pulling that community together is huge for us in terms of getting some of this work done. Tom Sexton, I see you have your hand raised.
You want to go ahead, Tom? Tom, are you there? You might need to unmute Tom. I'm not sure Tom is still there. So I'm just gonna, what happens if I do that? Nothing. Oh, cool. Any other questions or thoughts about policy? I will say that, while I'm waiting for questions, hands to come up, and Tom, if you're there, turn your video on and we'll go right back to you. Oh, there he is. Tom, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm on my phone out in the field. Do you see a trade-off between favoring regulation and not registering all, conveyances? Is there is there something to be gained by some registration that then makes regulation easier?
You know, Tom, I don't, because I think that
Okay.
it becomes a very gray and blurry line. So, you know, are you registering, you know, a 9-year-old's bike, a 10-year-old's bike, the kid who's riding a bike to school? And, you know, so that's one issue that comes up. And the other issue, it seems like you'd be creating another, you know, arm of government to try and manage these regulations. And, you know, it was very interesting. The Bureau of Motor Vehicles spoke out like super loudly against 1245, which would have required the registration of those motorized conveyances, because they said it was just going to be devastatingly expensive and complex, and it was a loser. So I tend to follow that line of thinking, that it would create a more expensive piece of bureaucracy than it would ever raise in revenue for anything good. And it would also be a very difficult thing to really administer, because, you know, how would you draw the line? And what about these devices that are, you know, we can't even get the state police to agree that they should behave like bicycles, like electric skateboards. So I think it would just be a mess. So we tend to believe that bicycles and electric assist bicycles, as defined by Maine law, so anything that's over 28 miles per hour and anything that's got a motor bigger than 750 watts, that's not an e-bike, and that's outside the parameter of how we would have defined a micromobility device. And those devices are currently illegal, and we do not we do not espouse ownership of them. I mean, like in the sense of the coalition taking them on as a group that we're going to be representing. We deal in human scale, human speed transportation, and we think that should remain free and unencumbered by extra bureaucratic processes.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Good.
I think we have time for one more. Jim Fisher had his hand up.
Sure. I apologize. I came in late. You may have covered this, but I'm curious if there's any legislative or policy work going forward on the sort of things I'm trying to do in Deer Isle, which is these experiments and getting towns to try new crosswalks, try road diets, try projects like that. DOT has been pretty interested in it, though the process is slow. I'm curious if there's anything at the higher level pushing that along.
Yes, there is stuff pushing that along, and seeing you here, Jim, reminds me that I have something to kind of revisit from you in my inbox at this time.
Right.
The DOT has been extraordinarily interested in this in the last year. They've really kind of come online. So BCM started doing demonstration projects and roadway experiments as far back as 2014. Initially, the DOT was, you know, sort of like, what the hell's going on here? They were aghast at it. And over time, they've seen its benefits, and it really permits both them and municipal staff to show responsiveness to concerns about roadway safety. So yes, the DOT is very interested in this. I can help expedite things because I'm definitely in the mix on developing these projects and helping get the permissions for them. But they have, the DOT has invested considerable money in buying materials for these projects. Yeah, I really think that your project is not even a heavy lift.
It's an easy one. I just meant in general, I'd like to see this statewide, a lot more experimentation, trying to figure out how to integrate bicycles and pedestrians better. And
well,
it seems like that's a good approach.
Yeah, they got this new program that's a spin-off of what they used to call the Planning Partnership Initiative. Now they call it the Village Partnership Initiative.
Right.
And the idea behind that is that it provides kind of a streamlined way to reclaim downtowns and village centers and make them more human scale. And you know, we're consistently you know, talking with them about the kind of parameters and specs that they use for these projects, and trying to encourage them to really be human scale. But I'm very encouraged by the fact that they're talking about it and showing support for it. So yeah, everything takes a little longer than you think it's gonna, but DOT is turning the ship and really coming out much more supportive of these sort of tests, which let people experience changes to the road before you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to make changes that maybe people don't like. You know, it's a way to kind of phase experience of changes in roadway design into a planning process. So yes, and I'll take this as a reminder that I need to look to
That wasn't my intent, but
sorry, it'll work that way. And by the way, the images came through on the last documents that you sent, so I saw exactly what you did. And I've got some. We're just going to pull it all in a little bit and get a proposal together. I think you'll be fine. So cool. We're at 12:56. Any last questions, thoughts? All right, well then I'm going to let you guys get on with your day 4 minutes early. And so I'll say thank you very much for attending and sign off. And I don't know, Ann, do we have any additional webinars or public things going on that we want to share with this group while we're here?
Nothing in terms of webinars, but we're building those back up for when the weather changes and people want to be inside. And I would say just stay tuned to our social media and our emails. That's where we're going to update you on anything going on legislatively, but then also the really fun side of riding, the rides we have going on and different events. So check them out.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and please stay in touch.